curious on what the shooter metas are going to look like now that Season 5 ants are out? Well, in this video, we are going to be going over that. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, join our Discord, and also follow us on Instagram so you always have the support that you need to really enhance your account and get yourself to the next level. Also, if you stick around until the end of the video, I'm going to show you how you can save a lot of money when you make in-game purchases by getting some amazing cashbacks each time you purchase anything. Hello everyone and welcome to another video of the Sky channel. So I know a lot of you have been asking when am I going to make the video on the new island and the new ants that are available. Well, here we have it. In this video, we are going to be going over the Season 5 ants, and then we're going to try to make assumptions on what are the new metas going to look like in theory. Right, we're going to look for synergies with the existing ants and see how they turn out to be, and try to come up with what are the ants that are probably going to be working really well together, and that's going to be our theoretical metas. Now, I do want to mention, as time goes by, there could be a possibility that practically the meta might be different, but for now, I'll explain exactly why I think these units should work. So the best thing to start off with is to go over the ants. And of course, for shooters, there's Indigo Velvet and Azure Crazy. Let's start with the Indigo Velvet and we'll only focus on the 3 skills that do damage because the others are pretty standard. Skill number 2. I'm going to go to the max level effect. During the battle, when its squad is in the front line, damage taken is reduced by 25% and damage dealt is increased by 25%. And each time damage dealt is further increased by 5% up to 50%. So this obviously says that this ant should be in the first row, right? Put it in the front. And then it says that it's actually reducing the damage that it takes and increasing the damage that it does if it's in the front row, which it should always be. The next part is pretty interesting, that every time it does damage, that amount of damage that it deals increases and goes all the way up to 50%. So it starts at 25, and I think after 5 damages, it goes up to 50%. That's the way I read this. I don't think it's 25 plus 50, which could be possible. I don't know, but I think it's 25 to 50. That's a lot of damage increase, by the way. So this is actually a pretty cool skill, possibly allowing Indigo Velvet to do a ton of damage. So it's not only a tank, but rather a big damage dealer. Skill number 5, max level effect. 80% chance, which is a high chance, to deal 320% damage to 2 random enemy squads. Not 1, 2. That's 640 damage total with an 80% chance, and it isn't mentioning any time to prepare. So just this first line is actually amazing, right? That's so much damage. 320% to 2. Wow. But it doesn't end there. It also steals 30% of their skill defense, and that's stackable and lasts for 2 rounds. So if you do 2 of them in a row, you've taken 60% of the enemy's skill defense for yourself. And the best thing is it's stealing it, right? Well, that came out wrong. Stealing isn't good, but you know what I'm saying? Stealing means that you are taking it away from the enemy, which means you're taking away 30 to 60% of the enemy's skill defense. So now when you hit them, you're hitting them harder because of that, but you're also keeping it for yourself. So when they hit you, they're hitting you less. So again, a very, very powerful skill, right? A very high chance to do a lot of damage to 2 squads every single turn, potentially, as long as you get lucky. And then you're also taking away the enemy's skill defense, and it's stackable up to 2 rounds, so potentially you could end up taking 60% of the enemy's skill defense and keep it for yourself. A very, very nice skill. Skill number 8. In the 2nd, 4th, and 8th rounds, shares 100% of its squad's buff effects with the backline squad. The buffs include what we saw in skill number 2, reduction in damage taken by 25% and increase in damage dealt by potentially 50%, as well as perhaps all of the skill defense that was stolen. I'm assuming that's also a buff, which probably goes to the back row as well. So we're giving the back row a pretty nice deal if you ask me, right? 50% extra damage, 25% reduced damage taken, and then also a bunch of skill defense based on the enemy that you're facing. And then when the backline squad deals damage, this squad, Indigo Velvet, has a chance to deal 230% chase damage to one random enemy squad. This is amazing as well because in these 4 rounds you're sharing a pretty decent buff to the backline squad, which generally should be a pretty nice damage dealer. Now the second part, there's a little bit of ambiguity there. Does it only happen in round 2, 4, 6, and 8 or all rounds? Not 100% sure, but that's a pretty nice effect that whenever it deals damage from the back row, this squad has a 35% chance to deal a nice chase damage, which is pretty cool because skill number 2 mentioned that every time this ant does damage, the damage increases by 5%, right? So chase damage does count as damage done, which means that the skill 2 gets triggered more often because of the chase. A lovely skill if you ask me, because not only is it empowering the back row to do a lot more damage and make it sort of a little bit more tanky, it's also allowing Indigo Velvet to do more damage via the chase damage and giving it that permanent buff, which is that extra damage, and it sticks around. So overall, you can see Indigo Velvet, a really nice ant with a lot of fancy skills. Honestly, I can see this going in a lot of top lineups, and if you get this, you're probably going to be very lucky. And just by looking at that, you probably aren't surprised to figure out that Indigo Velvet is actually the harder to get ant, right? It's like the Sly Hunter of Season 5. It's only available in the winning, dominating eggs. It's not available in the explored eggs, right? Because it is the better of the 2 ants, according to the developers. That's it for the Indigo Velvet, so let's go to the Azure Crazy, which is the less fancy option, but still a pretty nice ant. Skill number 2, 60% chance to deal 590% high damage to one random enemy squad with a 25% defense pierce. And defense pierce is basically the amount of defense that's ignored when dealing damage. I love how they say high damage, right? Because they want you to know that 590 is a pretty high amount of damage, so they're like 590% high damage, right? Not normal damage, high damage. But essentially, it means that it's a pretty nice amount of damage. 60% chance is a good chance. 590% is actually high damage, so I do give them that credit for that. But it's targeting one enemy squad. Now, the defense pierce is pretty good as well because it increases the amount of damage that you do to enemies, in particular when you're fighting Guardians, right? When you're fighting Guardians, they probably have a ton of defense, and this sort of breaks through or ignores some of that defense, right? Which is nice. Although, to be honest, Guardians also sometimes stack a lot of skill defense, and Indigo Velvet that we talked about earlier, it has that ability to steal that, so that's good too. Okay, so skill number 2 for Azure Crazy, a very nice amount of damage, focusing on a single squad. Skill 5. In the 2nd, 4th, 6th, and 8th rounds, has an 80% chance to deal 270% damage to all enemy squads once. And each release of this skill increases the number of damage times by 1. So basically what this is saying is that there's an 80% chance in round 2, 4, 6, and 8 that you're going to be doing a lot of damage to all enemy squads, right? In the round 2, that's what it is. It's 270 to each of the 3 squads. But in round 4, it's probably going to be your second time releasing that skill, assuming you were able to release it the first time. Now you're going to be doing 2 attacks per row. So it's actually 540% to each enemy squad. So it sort of goes up. And then if you're lucky and you actually end up hitting the 3rd time and the 6th as well, now it's another 270% added, which means you'd be doing 810% damage to each enemy squad. That's a lot of damage. And if you're lucky enough to actually last all 8 rounds against the enemy, or let's say it's PvE and you are sticking around for all 8 rounds, the 4th trigger, assuming you're able to release it each of the other 3 times as well, and the 4th time, the damage you'd be doing would be 1080% damage to each of the 3 enemy squads, assuming the 3 enemy squads are still alive. That's a lot of damage that actually stacks up, and I can see for PvE PvE, this seems like gold, because if you're lucky enough to release it every time, the fourth time you release it, which is on the 8th round, it's such a large amount of damage that your groundhog scores are probably going to shoot all the way up. But of course, even for PvP, it is pretty nice. The only thing is, if the battle ends within 2 rounds, you're not going to be doing a lot of damage. You have to live long enough to actually do this and to get the maximum potential. Skill number 8. During the battle, each time damage is dealt 4 times, it removes negative statuses and debuffs from this squad and significantly increases the damage of the next skill by 50%. So it's saying that whenever damage is dealt 4 times, it sort of cleanses some of the debuffs from this squad and also enables you to do a lot more damage from the next skill by 50%. Now there is a little bit of ambiguity in the write-up. It didn't actually mention damage done by this particular ant. Didn't even mention if it's damage done by yourself or the enemy. I'm assuming it's only counting the damage done by your ants, and then it cleanses some of the negative effects that's on Azure Crazy itself, and then it increases the damage dealt by the next skill by 50%. Now there's another ambiguity there. Is it only Azure Crazy's next skill damage or any ant's next damage? I'm gonna go by the assumption it's only Azure Crazy's next damage, but that's my assumption. I don't know how the fairy actually coded this in, but overall this is actually pretty good because number one, if you are under a negative status, it's removing it and then the next damage being increased by 50%. Imagine if that triggers on the 8th round for Azure Crazy's skill number 5 and it has been able to trigger it all those other times as well. You're talking a massive amount of damage, so obviously it can boost that damage by a lot, especially if we're also considering Indigo Velvet's round 8, all of the buff going to Azure Crazy at the back row to deal that disastrous 4th trigger off the skill 5. Whoa, that can be a lot of damage. And you know what? I'm probably seeing this even being a PvE meta, right? Indigo Velvet, and then we got Azure Crazy at the back, because you're gonna live 8 rounds in PvE anyway. This can be a lot of damage, so who knows what you'll be looking at when it comes to the PvE metas. But now it's our time to try to figure out what are the metas gonna be looking like. So first off, let's go to the possible free-to-play meta, and for that I need to explain the skills of another ant that I do not have, unfortunately, even though I've been attending all of the events. Bad luck. And that's Sly Hunter. That's the rarer of the S4 ants for shooters. And here you can see skill number 2, 60% chance each round to grant our frontline squads normal attack times +1 and normal attack damage +35. Meanwhile, our backline squad immediately deals 260% damage to 2 random enemy squads. Now I'm going to start knitting this together with Indigo Velvet and Azure Crazy because, well, no surprise there, this is the 3rd ant, and obviously the 2 that are going to be there are going to be the Season 5 ants. Let's start to see how they work well together. So Indigo Velvet is going to be the front row, obviously. Sly Hunter, I want to put in the middle row, and Azure Crazy in the back row. So when we see that, extra normal attack times +1 for Indigo, which means that it can deal damage 1 more time. I'm assuming that damage is going to allow it to trigger skill number 2's ability to increase damage every time any damage is dealt. I don't know if it's only limited to skill damage or normal attack damage as well, but if it is including normal attack damage, there you go. You get an extra 5% damage for your next skill. But the second part is a lot more obvious. The backline immediately deals 260% damage to 2 random enemy squads. So Azure Crazy ends up getting a chance to deal that extra attack. And the best thing is, when it does deal that extra attack, skill number 8 of Indigo Velvet should trigger, assuming it triggers on every round, or even if not, if it's just round 2, round 4, round 6, and round 8. Since Sly Hunter can trigger it every round, it can also trigger in round 2, 4, 6, and 8. And in that case, you get that extra chase damage by Indigo Velvet. So now it's not just Azure Crazy doing that damage, Indigo Velvet is doing chase damage as well. And when Indigo Velvet does that chase damage, it increases overall damage using skill number 2. And if it's round 2, 4, 6, and 8 where this got triggered, Indigo Velvet already granted some extra buffs 2 Azure Crazy at the backline, 100% of its buff effects, remember? So extra damage, which means that Azure Crazy ends up doing a lot of damage because of that buff, and then Indigo Velvet follows up with even more damage. So skill number 2, you can see the synergy right there for Sly Hunter, Indigo Velvet, and Azure Crazy, right? This skill is now actually dealing damage using not just one ant, but also having that follow-up damage from Indigo and potentially having a bunch of buffs shared between the two, enabling them to do even more damage together. Now let's go to skill number 5. 60% chance to deal 410% damage to 2 random enemy squads and removing the negative status from its squad and 1 random friendly squad. So this is sort of a damage dealing skill. It allows Sly Hunter to do a decent amount of damage and also cleanse some debuffs from allies. There isn't too much synergy that we can talk here, but it's a nice thing to have. Finally, this is also a pretty nice synergy. Starting from round 2, all of our squad's first damage dealt in each round is increased by 50%, and it triggers a healing effect after dealing that damage with a healing ratio of 160%. So healing is good, but the first part is even better. The first damage dealt by all of our squads every round goes up by 50%. Now that first damage can be a pretty high amount of damage. For example, Azure Crazy's high damage skill number 2, which does a lot of damage. Then you have the possibility of having Indigo Velvet's buffs in here, and now you have Sly Hunter giving you that extra buff as well. Assuming this is the first damage you do, it's getting extra 50% damage. So imagine the amount of damage you could end up doing with all of those buffs stacked up. So, to summarize, the free-to-play meta is probably going to look like Indigo Velvet in the front row, assuming you're lucky enough to have it, Sly Hunter in the middle row, and Azure Crazy in the back row. And when we talk synergy, Indigo Velvet is giving the skill defense steal, even round buff shares, extra damage dealt, reduced damage taken, and then Sly Hunter is also giving that extra damage every round starting from the second round, and it's also cleansing some debuffs. And then there's that forced backline hit, which actually is going to help trigger some of Indigo Velvet's chase damages and hence give Indigo Velvet more damage, which it gets from its skill number 2, 5% every time. And then when it's sharing that damage buff, it's actually giving the back row even more damage for the next skills. Azure Crazy in the backline is doing a bunch of damage in that skill 5 where it targets all enemy squads, and it does a pretty nice amount of damage because it can actually increase the number of times it does it. And the thing is that every 4 times damage is done, it does that self cleanse and then extra damage on the next skill, which I'm assuming is only for its own skills, but probably counts all damage that any of our squads do, including Indigo Velvet's chase damages, right? So if you include that, there's a pretty nice trigger of that skill number 8, allowing it to cleanse its debuffs much faster and giving it the extra 50% skill damage for its next skill trigger. It also has defense pierce on its big skill to allow you to do a lot more damage to potentially guardians that have a lot of defense. So that's probably what the free-to-play meta is going to look like. What about the pay-to-win meta? Is it going to look any different? And honestly, Indigo Velvet is probably going to stick around there as well, and I think so will Sly Hunter, but Azure Crazy might be replaced by another ant, which is the Rainbow Chaser. And why is that the case? Let's go to skill number 2, 70% chance to deal 290% damage 3 times, hitting a random target each time. If the same target is hit multiple times, the damage is increased by an additional 20%. So we know this does a lot of damage, but you know what's the cool thing? It's doing damage 3 times, and it's in the back row. So Indigo Velvet is like, okay, there's a damage done, 35% chance to do that chase, 35% chance to do the chase the second time, 35% chance of doing the chase a third time, right? So now you're looking at a lot more chase damage because of the fact that it's actually doing the same damage 3 times. Now, this was also the case with Azure Crazy because it does have the ability to do multiple times, right? In the 4th round, it might be hitting 2 times, 6th 3 times, 8th 4 times, which is actually pretty good as well because Indigo Velvet would then end up doing all that. But of course, it's also helpful to have this particular skill doing 3 times, because now Indigo Velvet has the possibility of doing chase damage 3 times as well. Albeit the fact that it is 35%, you could still get very lucky and end up having a lot of chase attacks. Skill number 5, in the second, fourth, sixth, and eighth rounds, perfectly aligned with Indigo Velvet that we were talking about before, 100% chance to deal 530% damage to one random enemy squad with an 80% chance to release repeatedly. After each release, the re-release chance decreases by 20% until it reaches 0. Okay, guaranteed hit, 100%, and it does a pretty nice amount of damage. And then there's that chance to release it again and again and again. And the cool thing is that every time it's releasing that, especially given it's exactly lined up with the round 2, round 4, round 6, and round 8, we know for a fact that Indigo Velvet is going to have that chase trigger active. So each time it's releasing, there's also a 35% chance Indigo Velvet is going to be releasing as well. We also know that Indigo Velvet has, in these rounds, already given the buff shared to Rainbow Chaser. So now it's not just hitting hard with its own skill, it's hitting hard with the ability of Indigo Velvet to deal more damage, possibly 50% extra damage, right? So Indigo Velvet also has that extra 50% damage, possibly, right? Because it doesn't give up its own buff, it shares it with Rainbow Chaser, and it's also chasing damage. So both Indigo Velvet and Rainbow Chaser are both doing a ton of damage to the enemy, possibly, assuming you have the lucky numbers lined up. That's a lot of damage, right? Now, skill number 8, during the battle, its squad gains defense pierce plus 35% and increases control resistance by 15% each round, which can stack, which is also amazing because, as I mentioned before, Guardians can have a lot of defense. So having defense pierce means you can end up doing a lot more damage. So to summarize, Rainbow Chaser seems to be designed to work well with Indigo Velvet because of the fact that it's doing damage multiple times, right? It's not saying release it once. All of its damage dealing skills, skill number 2 and 5, are actually skills that trigger multiple times. And it just so happens that Indigo Velvet loves it when ants are releasing skills multiple times because it has that 35% chance to chase with extra damage. The perfect thing is Rainbow Chaser and Indigo Velvet actually have a pretty nice alignment on when they do a lot of damage. Skill number 5, which is a pretty high damage dealing skill of Rainbow Chaser, triggers on the 2nd, 4th, 6th, and 8th rounds. Indigo Velvet already has that buff share active during that time. And of course, if the 35% chase damage only triggers in these rounds, you still have yourself covered because Rainbow Chaser is doing that damage during these particular rounds. Sly Hunter adds to the mix by giving both Rainbow Chaser and Indigo Velvet the extra 50% damage for the first damage they do every round, which is definitely helpful, while also giving some heals, some buff cleanse, as well as the opportunity to make Rainbow Chaser do damage more often using its skill number 2, right? And allowing Indigo Velvet to again have that chase that we were talking about, because every time Rainbow Chaser does damage, there's a chance that Indigo Velvet follows along. So those are the 2 units I think are going to end up being the metas. I don't know how it's actually going to turn out. We'll end up seeing it in the future when this actually happens, but these seem to be pretty nice ants that are coming out, and they seem to work really well with the Sly Hunter. Thank you so much for watching, and before you go, I want you to know you can save a lot of money with Aptoide in the Ants Underground Kingdom using my promo code. Check out the video that I'm sharing in the description box, or click the button that's going to appear at the top right of the screen that'll take you to the video, which will guide you through how you can use Aptoide to save a lot of money in the Ants Underground Kingdom. Keep in mind there is a limit. You can only use my promo code for 5 uses every 30 days. So make sure you're only using it on the highest value purchases like $100 ant coin packs. And then anything small that you want to buy, you can use ant coins for that. And finally, make sure you're getting the bonus by verifying the quantity of bonus that you're getting whenever you're making a purchase. And if there's a chance to add my promo code in checkout as well, do mention it there as well in case Aptoide triggers you to ask for a promo code. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please like, please subscribe to our channel, and I hope to see you in the next one.